Hi guys, I'm Ruslan. Let's get into this shocking story right now.
At 9:17 p.m., I signed the goodbye with a pen that cost more than my first car, and the gold ink looked like it might seal a future I didn't yet deserve. Vanessa's apartment was all quiet. Brightness and expensive silence, the kind of place where the air conditioner learns your name and the floor warms your feet as if wealth knows you personally. She raised a glass of champagne and said, "To the life you should have had all along." And I nodded like a man rehearsing the face of certainty. I didn't go home. I watched the river wind itself into a ribbon, phone on airplane mode, and waited for the part of heartbreak where the body notices and falls apart. It didn't come. Even grief seemed to study the wine shelf before speaking here. When I finally turned the phone back on, the messages spooled in. "Are you safe? Please don't disappear, Eli." And one from my sister. "Mom still asks about her. Don't do anything you can't unlive." I put the phone face down and told myself I was simply crossing a threshold men in suits were always crossing out of smallness into scale. The pen was heavy. The signature was mine. Nora smelled like lemon oil and laundry and the warm patience of late afternoons. We met years ago in a grocery store. All that promised 6 kinds of cereal and the particular mercy of being seen. She was 24, pinning her hair like a decision she could revise. Working at the library, with that soft gravity libraries lend to people who listen. I was a night manager at a restaurant that paid in smoke and applause, and the kind of tips that made you generous at 2 in the morning and humbled by rent day. We learned the shape of each other's days, the economy of small kindnesses, the richness of apologizing before coffee. We drew rings around a life, silver, honest, a porch I painted twice, a future measured in a fridge list, dog, garden, maybe a baby, maybe later. We bought second-hand furniture that knew other people's needs and made it ours. Sometimes we ran out of time before we ran out of love. Sometimes love simply stood there, stubborn, holding a lamp. Vanessa changed the weather the way a front does. You're fine, and then you're wet. And it turns out your jacket was never waterproof. She was a client first. A woman who ordered like she owned the decisions behind the prices, who asked to speak to the chef and then remembered my name as if she were filing it away in a safe. Her car windows were darker than doubt. "The first time we spoke outside the restaurant," she said, "your talent doesn't fit where you've put it." And my bloodstream agreed before my mouth did. She introduced me to rooms that spoke fluent money, to tables where the napkins felt like they'd gone to finishing school, to decisions that landed on weekdays and changed weekends. Consulting became a salary that made my hands sweat. She sent drivers with my name sharpied on signs and corrected me gently when I ordered the second cheapest wine, which is the poor boy's habit of not being caught trying too hard. "You don't have to hide your wanting," she said once, slicing an evening in half with a knife that cost more than our sofa. "You just have to aim it." The truth is not that I fell in love with Vanessa. The truth is that I fell in love with the scale her life implied. It was not greed. It was a bone-deep exhaustion with the math of smallness. The landlord's letter on our fridge had begun to look like a ritual humiliation. The car needed a timing belt and a prayer. The future required coupons. I told myself men are allowed to upgrade, and if anyone deserved it, I did, after years of closing checks and training staff and getting called in on my one day off. I told myself that what I felt with Vanessa was mentorship, plus gravity plus a future with sharper corners and better upholstery. I told myself a lot of things until the telling sounded like truth. The night I told Nora, lightning was practicing its handwriting outside. The power dimmed long enough for me to consider it an omen if I wanted to. She sat across from me with a lemon all shine on the table between us, a book half closed beside her hand. I had a speech prepared, something about opportunity and growth and how we could be even more us if I became a bigger me. And in the moment my mouth refused to stage such theater. "There's someone else," I said, and watched the sentence walk over the floorboards and sit in her chair. She blinked twice like she was negotiating with a page she didn't want to turn. "Is she richer?" she asked finally, and I hated how efficient the question was. "Yes," I said, and the word embarrassed me with its neatness. She made a sound that missed being a laugh and missed being a sob and ended up as something that would come back and visit me in better rooms. "Then you won't have to worrying about the landlord's note," she said, hands folded as if she were sheltering a sparrow with a broken wing. "Do you love her?" "I love what I could be with her," I said, and Nora nodded like she had expected that answer from a man who had begun practicing his absence. "That's not a person," she said. "That's a mirror." Our apartment let out the kind of quiet that has weight. A drop of storm water found the sill and became a sound to count with. I looked at the clock and realized that hours don't argue. They just leave. Nora stood up, walked to the sink, and ran water as if there were a script where the dishes mattered. I should pack, I said, and saw my mouth from far away, like I was lip-reading a stranger. Not tonight, she answered, and set a glass on the counter with care, as if the object might remember her steadiness later. Sleep here. Tomorrow, be brave enough to be the man you're choosing. She didn't touch me. She didn't break. She moved like a person whose bones had already learned the lesson mine were refusing. We slept in the same bed, not touching, and the storm conducted its symphony around our roof. And if my heart broke, it did it with good posture. I moved out 3 days later. The Ness's building had a lobby that smelled like citrus and the idea of safety. The doorman knew my name by afternoon. Vanessa handed me a key on a ring that looked like jewelry and said, "Welcome to the rest of your life," with the kind of generous certainty that made me feel like the slow student in a class designed for gifted children. We kept the good champagne in the fridge, and the better champagne in the separate fridge people, like me, hadn't believed really existed. I learned the vocabulary of linens and the fact that some towels are too expensive to be good at their job. My clothes hung 3 inches apart like they were embarrassed by crowding. My phone began to ring with the kind of invitations that look like legislation. I had a tailor. I had a club card you paperclip into your wallet to keep it from behaving like a mere card. I had a view that made the city look obedient when the sun arrived late and gold. Work if it is still the word demanded. My necktie be confident and my calendar be muscular. I became into quarters, the kind of man who knows which door to use in a restaurant with 3. I ordered wine without checking the column that used to rule me. I left tips that altered someone's week and told myself this was progress that reached other people too. And yet the days were quiet in a way money has no vocabulary for. Quiet like a museum after the tour leaves, and all the frames are still, holding their breath. Vanessa would come home from meetings where men in suits competed for oxygen and say, "We won," and I would kiss a victory that felt like it belonged to a nation I had just become a citizen of but hadn't learned the anthem for. The bedsheets were so smooth they nursed a kind of insomnia. The mirrors told the truth in a lighting designer's accent. I missed the way our old couch had learned my elbow. Nora texted twice in the first month, receipts for utilities, a photo of a book I'd been sure was mine but which was inscribed to her in my handwriting. I sent back a thumbs up and then, ashamed of the smallness, another message that said, "Keep it." She answered, of course. I pretended not to count the days. My sister kept sending me little mercies. Mom still asks, "How is she?" Dad's tools are in the garage if you want them. Call me, even if you don't know what to say. I became expert at not calling. Vanessa's friends were the kind of people who recognize a watch, as if it were a credential. They asked me where I'd summered, and I said a town by a lake, and they smiled like I'd told an old joke. When I spoke of the restaurants, kitchen heat and the way a service line becomes a battle hymn, Vanessa squeezed my hand under the table, pride shining like polish. "You're a story," she'd say after, in the car. They love a story. There is the day you get what you wanted and the day you learn what it costs. Mine arrived on schedule and disguised as a normal Tuesday. A chef I admired asked me to consult on a pop-up that would celebrate humble food done. Unhumbly his words, not mine, and I agreed because there was still a heat in me that kitchens fit like a glove. We set the thing up in a space with brick walls and a bar that could fight if it needed to. I spent the day with sleeves rolled and my tie in my pocket, and the old music of orders and flames and swear words that mean love. I felt like myself in a way the mirror had lately been failing to deliver. At 10:30, Vanessa arrived, with 3 partners and a photographer who had never eaten working food. The room shifted to include her the way water makes space for a boat. She kissed me like a trophy and said, "Look at you," and a server I used to train flinched. We plated a dish at the past bone marrow toast with cheap pickles made dear by attention, and Vanessa said, loud enough for the table, "It's adorable when he plays chef," and everyone laughed the way people do when they are showing they can afford to. It was a small cruelty, a butterfly knife flicked open and shut, but the air made room for it and I felt something I had been ignoring turn over inside my chest. The chef looked at me over the rim of his old baseball cap, and I saw in his eyes the version of myself that could still go home honest and late and good tired. I smiled for the photographer. The photo would later appear somewhere with a caption that mentioned resilience and reinvention, 2 words that sometimes mean forgetting. When we got home, Vanessa was effusive. Drunk on the way attention had landed on her favorite surfaces. "You were incandescent," she said, falling onto the couch that costs a used car. "And tomorrow we'll leverage it into something less manual." less manual, I repeated, and the phrase sat in the room like a box no one claimed. Don't take it like that, she said quickly. You know I love that you came from that world. It makes you relatable, but it can't be your whole story. Why not? I asked carefully, feeling a floor I hadn't realized was beneath me shift a half-inch lower. Because, she said, not unkindly, there's more. You've outgrown it, or it outgrew me, I said, and she smiled as if I'd made a charming mistake. We went to bed and the sheets were still too smooth for sleep to get traction. I saw Nora 2 months later, by accident that felt like scheduling. I had gone to our old grocery store, out of some muscle memory, that had dressed itself in errands. She was in aisle 6 with a basket that looked like another person's life, simple, modest enough. She noticed me, and in her face there was neither accusation nor invitation, which is its own species of mercy. Hi, Eli, she said, and I remembered the way my name sounded, when spoken by someone who'd watched me fix a leaky sink. Hi, I said, and we stood, suddenly new to each other, on a floor where we had once learned the choreography of choosing. You look good, I said, because I am sometimes a coward who uses cliches as armor. I am good, she said, and I felt the truth of it like a bruise does weather. I began, and she saved me from what I might have said. Are you sleeping? She asked gently, as if she were a librarian recommending silence. Enough, I lied. And you? Better, she said. The landlord finally fixed the radiator. The Lemon All brand changed their label. Small miracles. We both let out a small laugh that did not injure the air. I asked, because I had no right and every history. Are you seeing anyone? I'm seeing myself, she said. Not performative, just accurate. Book club runs by the river. The way Friday feels when you get the pasta water right. It should have felt like losing. It felt instead like watching something. I dropped sprout legs and leave the house without me. We stood there, two people who had once been a singular noun. She looked at my watch as if it were a bird perched where it didn't belong, then at my eyes the way a person hunts for weather beyond the glass. I hope you get what you wanted, she said, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in the old way, and left me among the jars that promise comfort if you add heat. I went home and stood in Vanessa's golden rooms and learned what quiet sounds like when it has nowhere to go. I opened a window. The river did not answer. I closed the window because the building prefers it that way. Vanessa texted, cocktails at 8. Partners want to celebrate the new deal. I typed, yes, and didn't send it for a long time, watching the text bubble sit like a chance to tell the truth. Then I sent it, because practice is powerful. We celebrated a lot that month, so often the word bent under the repetition. The deals were good, the articles flattering, the photos edited. Vanessa was kind in the way the sun is generous. She warmed everything she could reach and did not know how to dim. She asked me to choose between 2 countries for a winter vacation with such earnestness that I felt like a villain for hearing in it a test I hadn't studied for. The pen I'd used to sign my goodbye lived in a drawer with other important lying things. The night my mother asked about Nora at dinner, my father cleared his throat like he was moving furniture. We were at a restaurant that did the old classics in a way that made you believe in them again. My mother, who believes in linens and the correct way to slice a pie, put her hand on my sleeve. Is she well? She asked, and I said, yes, with an assurance I hadn't earned recently. Good, she said. She has a quiet that made me less afraid of your noise. My father lifted his glass. To noise, he said. A man who worked 40 years in a factory and never once learned it. Which door you use in a place with 3, and to the quiet that gets us through it. Vanessa smiled with her whole face and said, to both, but I heard in the room a note that had been tuned without me. There is a brand of loneliness that can only be purchased. I had it now, the way you own a suit that fits and still feels like a costume. I found myself sitting up at night, scrolling through pictures I did not post, remembering the sound our old couch made when I dropped onto it too hard, and Nora told me the springs were my fault. I remembered the lemon all and the way. Book looks collapsed on its face because the person reading it trusted the room. I remembered, with a precision stupid and absolute, a grocery receipt we once circled because we'd spent less than we thought possible without lying. I remembered the word we and how it makes grammar feel like a shelter. The next morning, I wrote an email to the chef with the baseball cap. Do you still need hands on the line sometimes? I asked, and he replied in 4 minutes. Tuesday, family meal at 5, service at 6, wear shoes you can forgive. I printed the email because old instincts stay ready. Tuesday, I told Vanessa I'd be consulting late. Tuesday, I put on shoes that had known the floor of our old apartment. Tuesday, I walked into heat and noise and the kind of command that does not require a wine list to authenticate it. Tuesday, I cooked onions until they told me the truth. Tuesday, I went home smelling like the person I'd been when I first learned how to be reliable. Vanessa didn't ask at first. She was on calls late and came to bed with a whisper of perfume and victory. After the third Tuesday, she asked, "Why do you smell like the past?" She said, not unkindly but with the suspicion that I might have betrayed the syllabus. "Because the past fed me," I said, surprising both of us. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me like a problem worth solving. "You don't have to romanticize hardship anymore," she said, soft. "There's a whole world that doesn't make you prove you deserve it." "I'm not proving anything," I said, and heard how defensive I sounded, like a man guarding a small fire with his body. "I'm reminding myself that I can make something you can't buy." We didn't fight. We were to accomplish for that. We negotiated. We scheduled. We budgeted attention like it had a board. I kept Tuesdays. She kept her patience. The winter vacation became a long weekend within driving distance. We told ourselves this was compromise and felt, secretly, like we had paused a movie neither of us had chosen but both were too proud to leave. I cooked a staff meal that made the dishwasher cry because it tasted like his grandmother's kitchen, and I let that pride fill places expensive pride couldn't reach. I sent Nora a text that said, "The radiator's still working," and then deleted it before it sent. Because mercy sometimes means leaving quiet alone. Spring arrived the way it always does, indifferent to narrative. The river traded its mean glitter for a softer language. The city took its shoes off. Vanessa closed the biggest deal of her career and I stood in a room that had been designed for celebration and clapped for a future I knew she deserved. She pulled me onto a balcony with a view that cut me in half and said, "I want to buy a place." "We live in a place," I said, which is exactly how a frightened man answers a generous dream. "Ours," she said. "A deed with both our names. This is not conditional love. Eli, I want you where I am going." There are sentences that vibrate at a frequency only your vanity hears. There are sentences that address your cowardice instead. This one did both. "Yes," I said, and the word threw a party and forgot to clean up. We toured spaces with windows that made other buildings jealous. We walked through rooms where the sun understood ambition. We nodded at countertops that glowed as if they knew they'd be photographed. When the realtor left us in a kitchen with a view so beautiful you could forgive its hardness, I put my palms on the stone and felt nothing but the cold. "Do you like it?" Vanessa asked, and I said, "It's perfect," and we both heard the way I'd said it. Before restaurant floors, pop-up press, a balcony with a deal on it. She turned the water on, then off, as if the faucet hid a more useful truth. "Do you want it?" she asked, and the question, honest as the lemon all shine from the life I'd left, cracked something I had been guarding with event invitations and handshakes that remembered nothing. "I want to be the man I am when I've just fed people," I said, and the room finally had something worth echoing. "I want to be with the person I am when I walk home smelling like onions, and heat and the relief of being useful. I took a breath, the kind you take when you stop pretending the deep end is shallow. "I want forgiveness I have not earned." Vanessa didn't look away. She leaned against the counter as if her body could hold the kitchen up and said the sentence, "A better person deserved sooner." "Then you should go ask for it, now," I said, because habit will always try to schedule redemption for later. "Now," she said, "before this becomes the most beautiful wrong room you ever own." The realtor texted a question mark. Vanessa texted back a rain check. We rode the elevator down in a silence that made sense. At the lobby, she took my face in both hands and kissed me as if we were placing a medal where it belonged. "If she says yes," she said, "don't come back because you owe me gratitude. If she says no, don't come back because you need a consolation prize. Come back only if you can love this without punishing, if for not being that. And if I just say thank you," I asked, 6 years old and hungry for permission. "Then thank you," she said, and the doorman held the door open like an ending with manners. I walked the river the long way, rehearsing and unlearning, collecting apologies that would melt if I held them too tightly. The old block looked smaller, as if my leaving had stolen inches from it. The door still stuck in summer and rasped in winter. I knocked. It was the right time of day for pasta. The smell came first, then the quiet step, then the lock admitting what it already knew. Nora opened the door and looked like the person who had once said, "We can afford the dog if we skip takeout every other Friday." Which is to say she looked like someone who could still be trusted around fragile things. I said her name and it came out as a number of years. Hi, she said, which is a word that has carried civilizations. I'm not here to ask for anything you don't want to give, I began, and watched her almost smile at the effort. I'm here because I became a man who measures a day by the size of its receipts, and I am tired of that math. I'm here because I left for a mirror and found myself practicing angles instead of honesty. I'm here, Nora, because I can cook onions until they confess, and I still can't forgive the version of me who made you smaller to fit the outline of a life I was auditioning for. She looked at me like you look at a storm that might go either way. I don't need you to hate me, I said. I do need you to know that I remember everything. I remember the lemon, all and the grocery aisle and the way you once said our luck is a muscle. If you can't forgive me, tell me how to deserve the no. The kettle clicked behind her at the exact wrong or right second. Nora stepped back so I could come in, which is not the same as letting a man back into a life. The apartment held my shape, the way water holds a departing hand for 1 second and then levels. Do you want tea? She asked, and my body almost cried from the plainness of it. We drank in the kitchen standing up. She listened the way librarians save you from your own bad summary. I told her everything I could without making her fetch anything heavy. I told her about the pop-up and the photographer and the sentence that built a staircase under me. I told her about the pen and the signature and the way quiet feels when money trains it to obey. Do you miss me? She asked finally, or the version of yourself you were when you were with me. It is a wicked, necessary question. Yes, I said, because the right answer sometimes has to be broken to be true. She closed her eyes the way you close a book. You love before the last chapter to make it last. I am not richer, she said, opening them again and holding my gaze like a level. I will never be richer. I don't know if that's what you want. I want to stop asking rooms to tell me who I am, I said. I want to be held accountable by someone who knows what my hands can make. I want the dog we never got and the porch paint that chips and the fights we apologize for before coffee. I want, in terrible summary, to deserve you. She shook her head a little, not yet, more like a woman pushing hair behind an ear in old, precise motion. Deserve is a verb, she said. You can't show up in a suit and claim it. I know, I said, and put my palms on the counter that still had a faint lemon halo. Then do something I can watch, she said. Not perform, do. You used to fix things without announcing it. The radiator hissed as if it had been waiting. I found the old wrench in the drawer we always forgot to organize. I bled the line the way YouTube and stubbornness had taught me. Less about plumbing than about learning a system and listening for air. The hiss evened. The heat forgave the room. I wiped the drip with the towel with the coffee stain we never got out. Nora watched and did not narrate. When I turned, wrench in hand, she looked at me not like a prodigal but like a neighbor. Okay, she said. That was one. There is no grand ending here where a man draped in regret becomes heroic by asking. There is no punishment either, not beyond the ordinary sentence of living with what you've done and what you still might. I told Vanessa I would not be on the deed, and she said she knew that when she told me to go. I kept Tuesdays, and then I kept Wednesdays, and then I began to come home to an apartment that smelled like lemon and the idea of mercy. Nora did not ask me to renounce suits or club cards. She asked me to be present at small hours when nobody applauds. We paid the landlord on time and then early, and it felt like setting down a rock. We fought about pasta water and made up before coffee. We bought a dog and named her Story because we are sentimental and easily pleased by our own on-the-nose jokes. On Sundays, I make onions tell me what they know. On Thursdays, I put on shoes I can forgive and feed people until the dining room sounds like a tide. Some nights I lie awake on sheets that weren't expensive and sleep anyway because tiredness is a blessing when you've earned it. Some mornings I wake up and Nora is already reading a book face down like it trusts us, and the light looks like it has alerted the room. I still carry the pen. I use it to sign checks to suppliers who will spend the money on rent and kids, shoes and a Friday that feels possible. The ink is still gold. I'm not cured, but every time I click the cap, I remember there was a night when I wrote my name under a goodbye. And I am still busy learning how to write it under a beginning without lying. If you ask me now whether she was richer, I will say yes, but I will also tell you that the richest room I've ever stood in was the one where a radiator hissed like a cat, until a wrench convinced it to be kind, and a woman watched me choose to be useful again, and the dog nosed my ankle as if to say, you again. Good. Stay.